Well, hello again. It's David Willey with Finn the dog, and I'm just going to talk for a few moments about another book that I heartily recommend. It's a book that I read first time quite some time ago, and I came across it again, like when you get to a certain age, you reread things or you find another copy, and it also made me realise I ought to read some of his other work. It's by a chap called Eric Newby, and the book I want to particularly talk about is something called Love and War in the Apennines. Now, Eric Newby, born 1919, did his education, worked in, his father was in the garment business in London, fashion garment business, and he worked in that for a short time before he did, at a very young man, head off on one of the last, what they used to call windjammers, these huge, great sailing ships that used to race almost between Australia and Britain, bringing grain back. And he went on a ship called the Mushulu, and he was an apprentice there. So it was back to the days of a sailing ship in the late 1930s. He's learning all the art of being up in the rigging, etc. He's doing his apprenticeship, really. And they race all the way back, and he takes photographs as well, and later that he puts that into a book. But he's obviously a young man with an appetite for adventure, and the war comes along, and he starts off by joining the Black Watch. He goes to India. He's trained as an officer, so he goes to India. He learns Urdu. By 1941, he's in North Africa, and he joins the Special Boat Service. And in a raid on Sicily, where they're going ashore to put explosives on an air base, gone fetch it with Ju-88s, it's a bit of a cock-up of a raid, and they miss their rendezvous point, and basically in the end they're out at sea, and they're picked up by Sicilian fishermen who hand them back over to the authorities. Basically, in many ways, they're actually rescued by these Sicilian fishermen. And he goes into a prisoner of war camp, and this is where the book is really describing from this stage onwards. He goes to a prisoner of war camp, and from there, when the Italians, they create an armistice and drop out of the war, that's the moment many British prisoners of war make their, or Allied prisoners of war in Italy at that time, make their escape. And Newby, he's busted his ankle only a few days before this all happened, so he's helped away from the prison camp and then basically goes on the run. And the book is really about that, not so much about the escape attempt, but this idea of how you lived or what he went through as an escaped POW. He's helped by the local Italians, a young Slovene lady who's a daughter of a local headmaster. She helps him, and he details how he goes through different stages of hiding out in various different villages. And one of the reasons, he didn't write the book till about 70, I think it was, 1970. And one of the reasons he wrote it, he said he was so pretty much ashamed of just this idea that whenever in Britain, so probably in America as well, you hear about the Italians in the war, it's their failure as an armed force, or even worse, cowardice, or their lack of drive and etc. in this. And what he wanted to do was put down how brave these Italian peasants basically were who'd helped him, and the average Italian who were making sure he wasn't recaptured by the Germans, and the risks they took, because as the war went on, it got nastier and nastier for the Italians. And obviously when Italy tries to get out the war, Germany then takes over most of the Italian mainline, continues the fight, and reinstates certain elements who will become even more ardently fascist and Nazi orientated in the Italian sort of setup, and they're instated that way. So they're on the hunt for the prisoners of war. And with this book, anyway, so it details all these wonderful things that he's going through. And as I mentioned, I just wanted to read a couple of bits for you from this, because I find them very good, very powerful, moving. Because he's on the run, he knows he's also risking those people who are sheltering him. People are being shot for sheltering and helping Allied POWs. The area of Italy's in the Apennine Mountains, very rural, very isolated in many bits and pieces, but still there's always a risk of an informer or somebody letting on that you're there, and the Germans start doing sweeps every now and again. Now, he's been quite lucky. He's been helping on a farm for a while, but at one particular point he's actually asked to come down and have a meeting in the village. There's been a sweep nearby and things are starting to get a little hot. And what he actually does, what he says here, in this particular part of the book, he said he's taken down in the evening to the very, very rural, from a mountainside type of farmhouse. And it says, and he gets down to the kitchen of one of the houses in the village. And I'll read on from there and just give you a little flavour of this. As usual, I found myself in a kitchen, but a more ancient and splendid kitchen than any I'd ever been in. The house itself was medieval, the owners people who wanted it to be like that. Sitting around a really massive table that looked as old as the house, there were 6 men, 5 of whom, the ones who had their hats on, I recognised as those I had met at the dance, who between them shared only 2 surnames. They were all hard, lean men. The 5th was very different. He was fat, and he wore square-horned rimmed spectacles. His hair was en brosse, like the maestro's, but though he wore country clothes, he didn't look like a real countryman. The effect produced by the whole lot of them, looking down the long table towards me where I stood, a ruinous figure by the door, was some sort of selection board, but what they were selecting it was difficult to imagine. There were a number of wine bottles on the table, and each man had a charged glass in front of him. The little boy who took me there withdrew. I was motioned to take a seat, and a glass of wine was poured for me. There was no small talk. The chairman of the board, for that was obviously what he was, said carefully and very slowly so that I could understand, "We have been talking about you amongst ourselves for some days. Many of the people in this village and in farms round have sons and relatives who are being hunted by the Germans. 3 of them were taken the other day. Some of them have sons in Russia, of whom so far there is no news and who may never return. They feel that you are in a similar condition to that of their sons, who they hope are being given help wherever they are, and they think that it is their duty to help you through the coming winter, which otherwise you will not survive. I speak for them because my father was born here, and they have asked me to do so. And as it has now become too dangerous to shelter you in their houses, they have decided to build you a house, which no one, except the people assembled in this room, our families, and one other person, and he is a kinsman, will ever hear about. The work will begin at dawn tomorrow." So powerful stuff, that idea that they're prepared to help him. They see the benefit, you know, like so many people all over the world. They hope that if they treat someone well, that's how they hope their own family, son, father, brother would be treated elsewhere. And Newby's really good the way he expresses himself. A lot of people say he's understated, he's never boastful. He's very humorous, but he doesn't intend to be humorous. He tells things as it is. And I'll give you the point about that, because powerful bit there that's just been presented to him. And then he says this about the following day, the next chapter, first line afterwards. "We left the house singly at 4:30 in the morning after drinking acorn coffee with grappa in it. I had a terrible hangover. After a marvellous dinner prepared by the elegant wife of the mysterious chairman, during which I had complimented her on the excellent mud she had produced, confusing the word for mushrooms with fungo and fango, which had put everyone in high good humour. The 5 of them had settled down to a carouse in which I'd been invited to join, as a result of which I had slept soundly in a stable. We met at the foot of the scree where I was sick and then felt better. And off he goes. So, as I say, wonderful stuff, understated. And there's another bit which, again, it's an element of, if you're interested in war memoirs, POW, whole host of issues about being a POW and how they had to cope and how they learned to live under the circumstances. One of the other things in this book, Willey's on the run. He's high on a mountainside, basically, at this farm. And one of the things that he's sent away from the farm after he's been working there for a while, but to hide during the day, just in case the Germans come up and they're bound to check the farmhouse. So one of the things that happens to him is he goes away from the farm, sunny day, up in the mountains, and this is what occurs. I took off my rucksack and lay down in a grassy hollow at the edge of the cliff. The sun was hot, and soon I took off my shirt, and then my boots and socks. The air was filled with the humming of bees and the buzzing of insects, and from somewhere further up the mountain there came the clanking of sheep bells, carried on a gentle breeze that was blowing from that direction. Then a single bell began to toll in the valley, and the other more distant bells echoed it. But they soon ceased, and I looked across to the distant peaks which previously had been so clearly delineated, but were now beginning to shimmer, and I became and become indistinct in the haze that was enveloping them, and quite soon I fell asleep. I woke to find a German soldier standing over me. At first, with the sun behind him, he was as indistinct as the peats had become, but then he swam into focus. He was an officer, and he was wearing summer battle dress and a soft cap with a long, narrow peak. He had a pistol, but it was still in its holster on his belt, and he seemed to have forgotten that he was armed because he made no effort to draw it. Across one shoulder and hanging down over one hip in a very unmilitary way, he wore a large, old-fashioned civilian haversack, as if he was a member of a weekend rambling club rather than a soldier, and in one hand he held a large, professional-looking butterfly net. He was a tall, thin, pale young man of about 25 with mild eyes, and he appeared as surprised as me, as I was to see him, but much less alarmed than I was, virtually immobilized, lying on my back without my boots and socks on. Drop. Buongiorno, he said courteously. His accent sounded rather like mine, I thought. Che bella giornata. At least up to now, he seemed to have assumed that I was an Italian, but as soon as I opened my mouth, he would know I wasn't. Perhaps I ought to try and push him over the cliff. After all, he was standing with his back to it. But I knew that I wouldn't. It seemed awful even to think of murdering someone who had simply wished me good day and remarked on what a beautiful one it was, let alone actually doing it. If ever there was going to be an appropriate time to go on stage in the part of the mute from Genoa, which I had often rehearsed but never played, this was it. I didn't answer him. Da dove viene lei? He asked. I just continued to look at him. I suppose I should have been making strangled noises and pointing down my throat to emphasize my muteness. But just as I couldn't bring myself to assail him, I couldn't do this either. It seemed too ridiculous, but he was not to be put off. He removed his rucksack, put down his butterfly net, sat opposite me in the hollow and said, "Lei non è Italiano." It was not a question, it was a statement of fact which did not require an answer. I decided to abandon my absurd act. "Sì, sono Italiano." He looked at me, studying me carefully, my face, my clothes, and my boots, which after my accent were my biggest giveaway, although they were very battered now. "I think you are English," he said finally in English. "English or from one of your colonies. You cannot be an English deserter, you are on the wrong side of the battlefront. You do not look like a parachutist or a saboteur. You must be a prisoner of war. That is so, is it not?" I said nothing. Do not be afraid, he went on. I will not tell anyone that I've met you. I have no intention of spoiling such a splendid day, either for you or for myself. They are too rare. I have only this one day of free time, and it was extremely difficult to organise a transport to get here. I am anxious to collect specimens, but specimens with wings. I give you my word that no one will ever hear from me that I have seen you or your companions, if you have any. In the face of such courtesy, it was useless to dissemble, and it would have been downright uncouth to do so. Yes, I'm English, I said, but it was a sacrifice to admit it. I felt as if I was pledging my freedom. He offered me his hand. He was close enough to do so without moving. It felt strangely soft when I grasped it in my own calloused and roughened one, and it looked unnaturally clean when he withdrew it. Oberleutnant Frick, Education Officer, and may I have the pleasure of your name also? Eric Newby, I said. I'm a lieutenant in the infantry, or rather I was, and I was put in the bag. I could see no point in telling him that I had been SBS, not that he was likely to have heard of it. In fact, I was expressly forbidden, as all prisoners were, to give anything but my name, rank, and number to the enemy. Excuse me? In the bag? Until I was captured. It's an expression. He laughed slightly pedantically, but it was quite a pleasant sound. I expected him to ask me when and where I had been captured, and was prepared to say Sicily 1943 rather than 1942, which would have led to all sorts of complications. But he was more interested in the expression I had used. Excellent. In the bag, you say. I shall remember that. I have a little opportunity now to learn colloquial English. With me, it would be more appropriate to say in the net, in the bottle. But at least no one has put you in a prison bottle, which is what I have to do with my captives. Although I don't think he intended it to be, I found this rather creepy, but then I was not a butterfly hunter. His English was good, if perhaps a little stilted. I only wish that I could speak Italian a quarter as well. He must have noticed a look of slight distaste on my face, because the next thing he said was, "Don't worry, the poison is only crushed laurel leaves, a very old way, nothing modern from I.G. Farben." Now he began delving in his rucksack and brought out 2 bottles wrapped in brown paper, which at first I thought must contain the laurel with which he used to knock out his butterflies when he caught them. But in fact they contained beer, and he offered one of them to me. "It is really excellent beer," he said, "or at least I find it so. To my taste, Italian beer is not at all good. This is from Munich, not easy to get now, unfortunately. Permit me to open it for you." And anyway, there's this wonderful exchange as these two, in the middle of a war, 2 enemies basically come together, and it ends. I'll just give you the end piece there. It goes on a bit and goes on to, he got to his feet. "Lieutenant," he said, "it has given me great pleasure to have met you. Good luck to you, and perhaps, though I do not think it probable, we shall meet again after the war at Göttingen or London, or Philippi," I said, or felt like saying but didn't. "Now, if you would be so kind," he said, "please give me the empty bottles, as I cannot obtain more of this beer without handing the bottles back. Bottles are in short supply." The last I saw of him was running across the open downs with his net unfurled in the direction of which I had come, making curious little sweeps and lunges as he pursued his prey, a tall, thin, rather ungainly figure, with only one lung. I was sorry to see him go. So I hope that lengthy little reading there from Love and War in the Apennines gives you a little bit of a flavour. Newby, by the way, later he's captured again by the Germans, and he survives the war, of course. Obviously, he's written all this. He goes back. He meets Wanda, the young Slovene girl who was helping him escape, and they marry, and they end up traveling the world afterwards together. He becomes a great travel writer, a photographer at the same time. The other book I'd recommend, if you like that one, which you may have heard of this one as well, because again, absolute classic travel writing book, A Short Walk in the Hindu Kush. In the early 50s, he contacts another one of his friends who he's met in the war years, and they head off to Afghanistan, to the Hindu Kush, which is northeast Afghanistan, and they go to climb a mountain in a very amateurish way, but the people they meet, the things they get up to and everything else, beautifully written, so understated again, very humorous. Evelyn Waugh writes the intro to it. And he comes across again as one of these figures that when you look at his whole life, that he goes on to be the travel writer or editor for the travel side of the Observer newspaper. He travels the world, he goes back and gets a house in the same place as the Apennines, does somewhere up there, sees the world changing from what he describes in that writing there, this part of the Apennines, almost medieval. And as he goes back and records that change as the families disperse, modern life comes into play, all sorts of things. And he writes about all this beautifully, not sentimentally in any way, but he just observes this and tells you about it. Very dry, very, very beautifully written things as well. And so I'd recommend that one as well, even though not as really a military subject at all. And he lives all the way through. He dies in 2006. You know, he's a well-known name. If you like travel writing, you probably have heard of Eric Newby, but if you're just in the military side, you might not have. And it just takes you into another one of those areas, easy to come by. I think Short Walk in the Hindu Kush has sold over 500,000 paperback copies alone, so easy to find out there, not hard books to find, but the one I'd say start with, because again, if you're coming at this with an interest in the military and what goes on in war, Love and War in the Apennines are just such a beautiful little moment of what happens to one person as a prisoner of war. And the reason he writes it, and I hope it comes across in that piece I read to you, was because he writes it because he wants to express his thanks and his admiration for the bravery of these people who basically had very little, almost nothing. And he wants to show that, look, these were really very brave people. Never let anyone say these dismissive sort of national stereotypes of cowards or failures in this or not this way or whatever. When their heart was in something, these were as brave as anyone. So I'd strongly recommend that one. As I said, I hope you like that. And just one other quote I just wanted to read you. I forgot to say this earlier on. When Newby went for his interview to join the SBS out in North Africa, the guy who was the other side of the table was a guy called Roger Courtney. Now, we've heard lots about the SAS, less about the SBS, I think, in the war. Now, Roger Courtney was a game hunter. He'd taken a canoe all the way up the Nile as a bit of an adventure and everything else. And Newby came in and was interviewed, and he just saw the note on the desk. It was actually a framed little quotation, and it said, this is what Courtney had put on his desk: "Are you tough? ? If so, get out. I need buggers with intelligence." And if you read about Newby, you realise how well he fitted people like the SBS, the way he could take with his intelligence. He was tough underneath it all, but actually he'd got a mind with him there that could see what was going on. And thank you, Finn, for joining in at the end there. Anyway, so I hope you like that one. Love and War in the Apennines, Eric Newby. Drop it. Yes, we can have a play now. Come on, back over here. Thank you. Go on then.